Okay, hello everyone and greetings. I'm Professor Joyce Hope Scott in Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome and good afternoon to people in the United States and good evening to the audience in the United Kingdom, in the UK countries, as well as Africa and elsewhere in the world. We're all in different time zones, but it's wonderful anyway. I want to thank you sincerely for arranging time to be with us for this panel today, hosted by the International Network of Scholars and Activists for African Reparations, Inosaar, for our roundtable or panel entitled Tear It Down, Reparations and Material Culture. The Inosaar is a collective transatlantic project initiated by two scholars with longtime interest in reparative histories. This is how we met Dr. Nicola Frith of the university. Raise your hand, Nikki, where are you?
Hi.
Dr. Nicola Frith of the University of Edinburgh, and myself, Professor Joyce Hope Scott. I'm from Boston University in the US, in collaboration with activists based in Europe, West Africa, and the Americas, the Caribbean. So I want to introduce members of the Inosaar and our key partner from PARCO, the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe, Ms. Esther Sanford, whom a lot of people know. Esther, you're there. And Mr. Kofi Mawuli Klu. I don't know if Kofi's in yet.
Yeah, he's there.
Oh, good. One of our collaborators, Dr. Vereen Shepard from the Center for Reparations Research at the University of the West Indies, and other people whom I can't actually see, but welcome, and who are all connected to Inosaar. So the Inosaar's central purpose since its founding has been to create an international network dedicated to reparations and other forms of restorative justice for the enslavement, genocide, colonization, and ongoing racial oppression of peoples of African descent. And with funding from the Arts and Humanities Research Council of the United Kingdom, which is how we launched this organization, over the course of this project for the last 2 years, we brought together activists and academics, state and non-state actors to explore the challenges of building solidarity around reparations in multiple ways. The process has occurred through hosting a series of workshops, seminars, culminating in a major international conference held in the Republic of Benin, West Africa, which resulted in the Porto Novo Declaration, which was signed by the King Potosome Akpong III, who is no longer with us, who's with the ancestors, or who has traveled to Alada. We must say that, we can't say anything else, on behalf of the National Council of Kings of Benin. Oh, today it is in response to the solidarity, anti-racism protests triggered by the brutal murder of George Floyd and other Black people in the United States that the Inosaar is hosting this panel discussion today. It's the first in a series of online sessions planned for the upcoming months, during which our aim with this discussion today is to think through the recent and planned removal of statues of historical figures linked to slavery, colonialism, and oppression of African descended people, such as the enslaver Edward Colston in Bristol, United Kingdom, Generals Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson in the United States, renaming of streets and buildings and public sites, such as the former Dudley Square in Boston, which has been renamed now Nubian Square, and the current movement to rename Faneuil Hall, the historic Faneuil Hall in Boston, to just name a few sites here in the United States. The debate over what should be done with controversial and offensive statues and other national iconography largely centers on competing narratives about public sites of memory between those who argue that getting rid of these statues is tantamount to erasing history, and those who say that far from representing history, these monuments idolize the role of those figures in crimes against humanity. We're fortunate, very fortunate, to have with us today an impressive panel of experts to launch this discussion. Ms. Cleo Lake, the Green Party Councillor and former Lord Mayor of Bristol in the United Kingdom. Mr. Kevin Peterson from the New Democracy Coalition of Boston, and Mr. Kojo Bonsu from the Global Afrikan Peoples Parliament in the UK. So now I want to talk about our format today. It is that each panelist will speak for about 15, not more than 20 minutes maximum. And then we will accept questions from the audience. So what we're asking the audience to post their questions through the chat feature here on Zoom. And my colleagues, Esther and Nicola, will collect them and pose them to the panelists at the end of their presentations. So we'll have all of the speakers speak first, you in the meantime, so that you don't forget your questions, post them to chat or make note of them. Well, preferably post them to chat, that way we will have them and can call on you. So thank you, first of all, again, for being here. And we want to welcome our first speaker, who will be Councillor Cleo Lake, followed by Mr. Kevin Peterson, and then Mr. Kojo Bonsu. Can we please welcome Councillor Lake? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great to be here this evening. It is this evening for us here, just past 6 o'clock. And yeah, I thought I would start just by giving a little bit of context and how I became involved in the movement known as Countering Colston. As you heard in the introduction, Bristol is really littered with these colonial references and references to people who have committed crimes, great crimes against humanity. Not only has the city been littered with these references, but actually up until just a couple of years ago, the city publicly celebrated these figures. Children, students were co-opted in and made to annually celebrate and commemorate such persons. And I was one of them as a young person, because I went to Colston Girls' School. And when I went to Colston's Girls' School, I did not know the person who the school was named after. When it became clearer to me that this was a very, to say the least, controversial character, it became a real power struggle within my school to be heard and to actually have the history explained to us in its entirety. I can remember seeing on the news, in fact, probably when I was about maybe 16, 17 years old, I could see members of my African heritage community demonstrating and demanding that the statue should fall. And this is going back, you know, probably about 20 years. And I took it to my English literature class, which was actually tutored by the head of the school at that time. And I said, you know, what is happening here? What's going on? There is very unhappy people. Can you explain to us a little more about this person, Colston? And I was dismissed. I was talked down. I was made to feel just, you know, terrible. It was a moment which really kind of profoundly affected me, actually, as I sat there silently crying to myself in front of the headmistress and in front of my peers, because it was a denial, and a denial that we faced throughout history, as we know. Let's fast forward a bit. And in fact, I should give some thanks to not only the people who have over the decades, and it is documented, and beyond that, who've always resisted, who've always challenged this celebration. We all know it's not a new thing. And also through that, giving some credit to an artist. In fact, Bristol is a very creative city. We are quite independent, we are quite alternative. And it was an artist, Labita Clayton, who is of Namibian and Cornish descent, who only until recently really embraced and found out about her heritage, incidentally. She set up a pirate radio station called BS2 Resist and Revolt. BS2 references our postcode in Bristol, which has traditionally been home to the African Caribbean community. So she set up this mock pirate radio station, and we gathered round and we had this conversation pretty similar to what we're doing now, actually. And that was where I met members of Bristol Radical History Group. And they started talking about the power that exists in our city, namely a group called the Merchant Venturers, who are a society, an elite society that still exists and operate today, and can go back, 400 or 500 years, where Colston was one of their key players. They revere him because Colston, being the deputy governor, i.e. CEO of the Royal Africa Company, was responsible for opening up the trade to them and to Bristol. Anyway, we were having this discussion, and I happened to mention it was happening in October, this discussion, back in 2015. And I happened to mention to them that, as an ex-Colston girl, I know that there will be, on the first Friday of November, a celebration, a commemoration to Colston at the cathedral, at Bristol Cathedral. They were flabbergasted, to say the least, that this was going on. A day when girls were expected to go and buy the flower of Edward Colston, his favourite flower, a bronze chrysanthemum, pin it to their lapel, and all the rest of it, and go and hear excerpts of his will, sing his favourite song, and give thanks to someone who apparently gave them so much, no reference to anything else. So anyway, that was the moment when we decided enough was enough. We were going to rock up at the cathedral and actually hand out pamphlets explaining to the students who Edward Colston really was, because he's presented as a philanthropist, a charitable man, and his statue, which is now gone, actually said on its plaque, "To the most wise and virtuous man, Edward Colston." So we handed out these pamphlets, and that's where we started. We obviously had some resistance. It was quite ironic. I was invited into the service, actually, which I hadn't attended for over 20 years since leaving school. And I was credited with my activism, credited that it was because I had gone to Colston Girls' School that I now had, the gusto and the intelligence and the critical thinking to be out there campaigning, which was quite interesting, to say the least. This went on, and we step by step tried to dismantle this and other things. These societies meet up, they have these elaborate dinners celebrating this man. Steps along the way, we were lucky enough to have someone who was part of the Colston Hall on their board of trustees, Marty Burgess, who, incidentally, has recently become the first African heritage person to become a member of the Merchant Venturers. Anyway, we'll park that for a minute. Marty was on the board of the Colston Hall, and I'd recently become a councillor, and we had a cabinet meeting, actually, one of the first cabinet meetings at Bristol City Council. Of course, under our new mayor, Marvin Rees, Europe's first mayor of African heritage. And we were told quite clearly, you can only ask questions that relate to the agenda of cabinet on the particular day. And I did notice there was an agenda item signing off £10 million to the Colston Hall. Wow. Well, I had something to say about that. I had something to say about that because I posed the question, if we are signing this off, is it not an opportunity to discuss a name change? And in fact, the chair of the then called Colston Hall said absolutely. I mean, he was quite happy with that, and he would be, wouldn't he? Because he was getting his 10 million quid, or hoping to. And also along with that, I also asked the question, why are we signing off £10 million yet we're not giving a penny to our long-standing Black-led institutions in the city, such as the Malcolm X Centre? And that will become a bit more relevant down the line in what I want to say. Anyway, eventually the Colston Hall did buckle under pressure. There were protests outside where members of Countering Colston would actually chalk messages outside of the hall when they were having their concerts, and various other things. And I would like to think that having someone on their board of trustees also helped, and the fact that I was now a councillor. So it was becoming more difficult for people to ignore me and to ignore the campaign. And I think that is significant to note. So Colston Hall announced actually that they would change their name. They closed for a period for redevelopment, hence the 10 million quid, and have agreed. And they have now, in the last actual few weeks since everything's kicked off, they've actually taken the lettering down as well. So that was one of the first things to fall, if you like. And then through this period, we've also had a group spring up of consultants who worked with a primary school, Colston's Primary, because so many things are named after Colston in Bristol, or were. They had a consultation, the school changed their name, and then they said, actually, let's get a contextual plaque on the statue. But let's also note, as I referenced earlier, the arts and independent nature of Bristol, because there was a guerrilla artist who was sticking an alternative plaque on when the statue was there, you know, highlighting the amount of lives that Colston destroyed. So there was going to be this alternative plaque. It actually went back and forward a lot with some formal and informal consultation, trying to create an accurate picture of who this man was, with people from Bristol radical history actually also intervening and not just giving facts and figures to do with our, you know, African heritage community, but also the people who would not, the white people who would not and would never benefit from Colston's wealth because they weren't the right type of poor. And that is also an important point, because with this, there is a backlash against what's happening by members of Bristol. And it's people who hold on to this idea that Colston was their hero, when actually we scratched beneath a lot of this and learned that he wasn't their hero, but it's part of the mythology that's been built up. Well, the plaque was also ditched. It was made, it was paid for, it was created, but it never got to go on the statue. And that was probably the last step before we actually saw the topple of the statue, which, you know, many people had set up petitions, tried to go through the right channels. None of it was moving. None of it was moving. The plaque didn't happen because the merchant venturers, who wield a lot of the power in the city, intervened and got their way again and said they weren't happy with it. So that was crumbled. So that's a bit of the history of what has happened that brings us where we are in some ways. Of course, as I've said, things were attempted to have been done through official channels, but nothing was budging. So I was overjoyed when I saw the toppling of the statue. It was a massive sense of relief. And since then, so many people have spoken out, including the mayor himself, to say how uncomfortable and painful at times it was to pass that statue, how it makes us feel. And I think for me, how it has made me feel really came again to the forefront when I had to attend, as a city councillor, I chose to attend Remembrance Sunday for the first time in my life, a couple of years back. And the cenotaph had been, you know, cleaned up, and the centre of our city had been developed. It all looked very nice. And there we were. It was like attending one of the worst funerals ever, my experience of Remembrance Day. It was emotive, it was painful. I wasn't prepared for it at all. And there we were, paying our respects, bowed heads. And then you look up and we're all facing in the direction of the Colston statue. And I thought, this has got to stop. This isn't right. And I can feel it. I felt it before, and I really felt it deep inside me that this just feels so, so wrong. And so we continued to lobby, and we continued to try and do what we could. During this period as well, I would mention that I was invited to Trinidad. There is the Crossroads Freedom Project over there that have had some gains. They tried to, lobbied to get Milner Hall of the University of the West Indies, the residential hall, renamed. That has been done. And their campaign continues to get the removal of Christopher Columbus there. And it was important for me going over there and meeting so many members of different communities, not least the indigenous communities, whom many of the textbooks tell us don't exist anymore. They've gone on paper in the textbooks, but there they were, still fighting, still demanding to be heard, still struggling. And that was a pivotal moment. Also, I think we could acknowledge that much of the contemporary movement was spearheaded in a way by the Rhodes Must Fall campaign. And we have now seen that, I believe, there is an agreement that that statue of that person is going to be removed. We are also looking at this wave of activity and interest following this Black Lives Matter movement, some say now moment. And we are seeing institutions at first reactionary and looking as though they're getting on board with a significant move for equity or equality, and now they're backtracking. Even Bristol City Council, with an evidenced history of institutionalised racism, they got down on one knee and they put a footer at their email, Bristol City Council logo in black and white with Black Lives Matter, which struck me as being rather bizarre in many ways. I'm not sure why, if they even knew why they were doing it. And we've seen political figures backtrack and now not endorse the Black Lives Matter movement because they realise, well, maybe it's not a moment. Maybe there are bigger demands that people want to see, such as defunding the police. Of course, many people in denial here who cannot possibly, in their small-mindedness, see that there is any correlation between the experience of African heritage people in the UK and African heritage people over there in America. So, what's happening today? There are more movements that are happening. Institutions, we've seen, I think, the leading figures within the church, the Archbishop, I believe, who's now saying, well, do we need to look at white Jesus? So the racists will be happy with that. Not. But isn't that an interesting claim that he's now saying, that we need to look at the white Jesus? Wow. And we've seen Bristol Cathedral now setting about. They've covered up names inside the cathedral that reference Colston, and they're about to take out the stained glass window. And I think to myself, great. I mean, I think it is important that these contested monuments are contested, and that they are, if they're not being contextualized, then they should be removed. I had always advocated that the statue should be removed of Colston and put in a museum. But anyway, how far will these institutions go? How far are they willing to go? How will corporations and others actually give equity to us? Will they ever do it? Or will it always be tokenism? Will Bristol Cathedral, will the church really apologise for what they've done to us historically? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And I'd like to just finish what I wanted to say by also thinking about the harm that's done to the psyche of seeing these items on the city landscape that negate our experience and tell the mainstream that it was okay in many ways. It doesn't foster a sense of education, it doesn't foster a sense of empathy. And I think one thing that has happened now is that more people are getting educated on the history and also being able to connect the dots. Hence why young people connected those dots between Black Lives Matter today and the statue of Edward Colston. But as we think about the city landscape, for me, as much as those items hurt us as painful references to our history, much damage is also done when our spaces in our cities that belong to our community are taken away from us. And what I mean by that is that I've seen it. We've all seen it. Not just when land was taken away from us and when we were displaced in our motherland or in other countries, but it happens right here in the UK. It's happening right here in my city, where we've had our own centres, our own cultural centres within our Black community, sadly owned by Bristol City Council. And I've seen and we're feeling how these are also being taken away from us and how we are being displaced. And that is as painful as the statues. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Councillor. I'm sure you've got lots of questions. Please note them, and we want to move on now to our next speaker, Peterson from the United States.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Scott. I'm pleased to be a part of this panel to talk about this issue. I am in the city of Boston, where we are in the midst of a 2.5-year campaign to change the name of Faneuil Hall. The hall is named after Peter Faneuil, who was a slave owner, was a slaver. At the time of his death at 42 years old, he owned 5 slaves. He willed those slaves to his sister as a way of perpetuating slavery. A iconic hall sits in Government Center called Faneuil Hall. Peter Faneuil gave the hall to the city of Boston in 1742. It stands as a place around which Bostonians congregate. There are yearly naturalizations, citizenship ceremonies throughout the year, I should say, at Faneuil Hall. And 20 million people from all across the globe, the United States, visit Faneuil Hall each year. It is the second most visited tourist spot in the United States behind Disneyland. So it attracts a great deal of attention. So our organizing has been focused around renaming the hall by making appeals to both the Boston City Council and the mayor of Boston, and we met with a great deal of resistance. The argument being that if we change the name of Faneuil Hall, we are somehow erasing history. We use this. We have been using this this campaign to educate Bostonians and people across the globe about the contradiction that exists in Boston, and particularly as it pertains to this hall. Its nickname is the Cradle of Liberty. We've been trying to contextualize that as something that is not quite true. It is not a cradle of liberty. In fact, for Black Bostonians, it represents a house of horror. So as we've been making our argument, we've been saying that nowhere in the city of Boston would there be something called Hitler Hall or Mussolini Hall. That's our way of making the comparison to Peter Faneuil, who participated in the slave trade and in the genocide that's connected to slavery in the U.S. At the same time, as we've been campaigning around the name change, we've been looking or pointing towards the opportunity to have deep dialogue in the city about racism, structural racism, and the racism that we encounter every day. So we've raised up the issue of income inequality, for example, based on that is based on racism in the city. The average net worth of a Black family in the city of Boston is $8, compared to $247,000 for the average white family in Boston. Those are some of the contradictions. If you're a Black male living in the city, you're more likely to die of chronic illness than a white counterpart, male counterpart in the city. So we've been using Faneuil Hall as a metaphor, as a way to sort of really highlight these other contradictions in the city with regard to race. The city council in the city is currently considering a hearing order where citizens of Boston can citizens in Boston can come together and state why they are in favor of a name change or state their opposition. So we see this as a critical opportunity for people to come together and engage in race talk in order to get to the more systemic issues of racism that we experience in our city. So we're looking towards success. The campaign is by no way complete or finalized. We're hoping that the outcome of this exercise would be, again, deep dialogue, conversations that point towards racial reconciliation, repair, reparations. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Kevin Peterson from the New Democracy Coalition of Boston. So we're going to move on then to Mr. Kojo Bonsu, who will speak next.
Okay, greetings, family. My delight to be part of this exercise. And it's interesting to listen to Cleo's story and to tie the past, the present, and even the future to her statement in relation to the impact that even the sight of subjugation still have in the minds of our people. Okay, so my name is Kojo Bonsu. I was born in Jamaica, and many will be able to put the connection that my definition of self has developed over the past 20 years. I was born in Jamaica, and the story is that I've always loved history. And being a part of the Methodist Church in the late 90s, we had a Wilberforce celebration to which I was an active participant in. Not knowing the connections or not knowing the truth behind the event, I gave it my best. However, I moved to the UK, and coming into the UK within months of being here, my first question to my wife was, why is it that so many of my people seem to be sweeping in the, what they call the plaza is it plaza? Well, this big shopping center. I was quite taken aback that so many of my people were just sweeping. And I was coming out of an environment where we were in position of influence. Being part of a church didn't help either, because eventually I had issues where the majority of our children in the Sunday school, were our African heritage children. And sooner or later, they would have come to me to tell me of stories that they were having in the schoolroom or in the classroom. And I was part of the church leadership. So I went to the church leadership meeting, and out of innocence mentioned what these children were saying to me, and how could we as church leaders play a part in changing the pain that they were going through. It was said to me that I'm not saying that there isn't a problem, but look how long your people have been here and nobody has said anything. And if there's a problem, the problem is you. And I would suggest that you probably go back to where you're from. Now, that really opened up my eyes to a whole lot of things. So as I search to understand or overstand the dynamics of the situation, my neighbor gave me a book called Great Men of Color. Shouldn't have given it to me because the person who gave it to him told him not to lend his books out. Anyway, I read the book and I kept saying, wow, nobody told me this. Nobody told me this. So subsequently, from reading that book and within probably about 3 years, I ditched everything that was not relevant to myself. I ditched the plantation names. I ditched the European clothes, and my value and focus was now the healing of self. Subsequently, I got involved with African heritage groups, PACM, Al-Kebulan, and as the story goes down, we went into a support. We were developing a support system known as INAP. However, the story continues. We then became GAP, to which I'm a part of. And the element or the essence of GAP really is that we support reparations, but it has to be developed in the context of a power base, which can only be the continent of Africa. We cannot support a situation where there is continued balkanization, segregation, and fragmentation, because we are now realizing that there is something deeper than the symbolism of the statues. The removal of the statues is the beginning, but there is something deeper, and what we're going for in terms of the depth of it is to go right to the base of the system and the structure of racism, which was developed in the context of Britain's legal enactment in 1661 that was then put in place in Barbados, then moved to Jamaica, and then to Virginia. And in my eagerness to find out what was happening, I had a conversation with my sister Esther, and she did one of the best things that I can imagine. She didn't just give me the information, she actually told me what I should be looking for and where I should go looking for it. And having done that, just by going in, searching out the information, it has given me a deeper sense of connection to the cause and the justice of what our cause is. And I was impacted just like Chloe. I was impacted when I came into the knowledge of the Barbados Slave Code, which I have renamed as the Chattel Enslavement Plantation System Code. Having read it, having seen what it is, I was then able to understand or overstand the impact it was having on my own personal life in the context of Britain, and by then on the lives of my children. It then dawned on me that any change that there was gonna be, that change had to start with me. And this is where we're extending the whole issue, that education is preparation indeed for reparation, for the repairing of the damage and the harm. The taking down of the statues, yes, is a beginning. And after the statues have been taken down, what next? And it then takes us back to the very fundamental situation of going into the situation of having an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparative justice. The struggle is that we're still trying to get our people to see the value of signing the petition Ideally, we're looking for the 100,000 that it will trigger an automatic debate. But as we speak, the truth need to be made to the situation that Black Lives Matter is actually a Black Lives moment, because as I've said, after all of this is done, what next? And we really need to get to the place where, as the global African family, we can exercise power with regards to our own self-determination, our own sovereignty, and the restoration of our international legal personality. Even more so, the automatic connection to a landmass that gives us this automatic right to speak to our own truth, our own vision, and our own destiny. When I compare the probably 4 issues that Black Lives Matter is highlighting, I can highlight that in the context of Stop the Mangamizi, there is about 20 issues which encompasses the whole dynamics of how things are impacting on our lives as African and African heritage people globally on the continent of Africa, in the Americas, in Europe, wherever we still come under the shadow of European subjugation and imposition. Interestingly, many people will want to say, and I've heard this being said even on the news media, that we're asking for money in terms of reparations. And I'm now taking the delight in explaining that reparation actually means to repair the harm and the damage that was then, now, and if we're not serious, it probably will go into our next generation, therefore highlighting the work that we have to do and the work that is in front of us. Having lived in the UK, it's been an eye-opener. An eye-opener in the context that there's a high level of misinformation, propaganda, and miseducation among the English population. And I will in fact not refer to them as being indigenous because I'm too informed to say that. And as I've described, that they've taken their role very seriously, having been put in their place by their own ruling elite, given the position of gatekeepers. And I can give examples in my own personal life where my children, especially my son, who took the 11 plus, his grandmother died the very same day he started the exams. The last paper he did, I went for him, went straight to the airport to go to the funeral in Jamaica. And having gotten the results, he fell short by about 7 points. And having gone to the school to get the support to do an appeal, the headmistress, who was actually a Welsh woman, looked at me and my wife and she said to me, "Why are we bothering to do this? Because I do not see him as being grammar school material anyway." 2 years after that, a parents' meeting, and I've never missed a parents' evening. I've always been at parents' evening for my children. And my daughter's teacher would have said to me, if I have high expectations for my daughter, I'm psychologically damaging her. So it highlighted that there was, well, I did say to her, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not surprised by what you've said. And this is where I'm supporting to decolonization in education, because it is the misinformation that creates the perceptions and the prejudices and the biases. And it impacts highly on English people who basically were at the forefront of suppression, oppression, repression, and exploitation of their own people. And having said this, they've taken on this position of entitlement. And I'm just watching one of the write-ups where they're gonna get intensely angry because we're highlighting truth, but truth will always be truth. So they've taken on the position of entitlement. Then there is this exclusivity that in terms of behavior and humanity, it's just them, and exceptionality that everything in terms of human value and worth is themselves. And this is where in the context of reparation and in relation to us, in repairing that harm and damage, we have to distance ourselves from this thinking. And as Bob Marley rightly said, that this idea of we have to, you know, in his famous song, we are the only ones who can clean ourselves from this mental slavery. So as we put everything in context, yes, there's a movement, but the movement has to be relevant for us, where we're impacting and making the change that will bring that which is positive and enlightening for us, not just in our lifetime, but for those who are not yet born. Interestingly, having traveled into the continent of Africa and having done so for the past 20 years, it highlights the importance of getting to the very depth of this imperialist structure that even now denies me the joy of returning even to my own home and my own space, that when I'm going, I have to go and buy a visa. I find it quite disturbing and disheartening. But anyway, hopefully and passionately, we're looking for a change where we'll have this access back to our power base. When I did my engineering degree, the last module I did, we had a discussion with our tutor. And he highlighted, and this is where the misinformation comes in, where he thinks he was doing the class and me a favor by declaring that if we want to see the impact of unemployment and poverty, just go anywhere in Africa. I mean, as an adult and one who was now developed in their own history, when it came to my opportunity of speaking, I said to him, but Peter, let me just remind you that there is nowhere else in the world that you will find a book called Oliver Twist, which highlighted the social systems and structures that decimated a people, but here in the UK. However, the Lantana system that destroyed social fabric among their own English people was that which was imposed in the context of Lantana and the taking of our lands on the continent of Africa. Berlin Conference 1884-1885. So as we gather now, bringing our thoughts together, bringing our energies together, and the vision that yes, we're going to change and make a change that will be beneficial to our children, and especially those who are not yet born, and bring our return, our humanity. It impacted on me, Cleo, when I read the Barbados slave code, the chattel enslavement plantation system code, where it said and declared that as African people, we're not humans, but chattel, real estate, and property, having no human rights, no right to life, no aspirations that they should have respect or regards for, having no protection under British common law, because we're brutes, beasts, and savages. Having coming to an awareness of that, I was then able to find the antidote to deal with the traverses and the contradictions, even in the present day issue that we have to face. So I would then say that yes, statues have to go because it does impact on the psyche, and Cleo rightly highlighted what that was. But that's just the beginning. And as I've said before, reparations, yes, but it has to be from our power base, which is the continent of Africa, as it extends and gives protection to African people wherever we are on the face of the earth. Thanks for the time. It's the first I've had the chance to express collectively my thoughts over the years of research. Thanks to Hilary Beckles, still have his books, and the sister from Norway, what's her name? Nora Whitman. And the journey continues, and the need for informing oneself continues, and having this information, we'll then be enabled and equipped to do that which is necessary for our ancestors and what they've done for us. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. All of you, we're very, very happy that you took the time to give us your very, very powerful insights on this issue. And now I want to let us have an opportunity and you to engage the audience with questions that I know have been accumulating. And I'll just ask Esther and Nikki to field those questions for us, with preferably, if possible, the names of the people who posed them. That would be nice.
Okay, yeah, there was a question from Verena. Verena, are you still here?
Hey, Verena.
Yes, I'm still here. I was just about to leave.
Okay.
Yeah, I know you've got to go. I don't know whether you wanted to, do you want me to read the question, or would you like to kind of pose it yourself?
Remind me which one.
So you looked at, you were talking about Trinidad and the Columbus statue, or perhaps, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So the Center for Reparation Research had a Zoom seminar recently on history education, how we can learn from the past to understand our present. And we wanted to ensure that, because it was geared towards teachers and students of history, we had the input from the indigenous people of Trinidad and Tobago, and also from Dominica and St. Vincent of the Grenadines. So the three chiefs were on the seminar, so that students could realize that they are here, they haven't disappeared, but that they have real issues, and that we have to engage with the issues and take the issues on as we lobby for reparation and support their community. But I'm saying that I was surprised, we were all surprised, when the chief from Trinidad and Tobago did not come out swinging against the Columbus Must Fall movement and the Rhodes movement in Trinidad and Tobago, headed by Shabaka Kambon. But his only concession was, well, if it does fall, let's have a monument to the indigenous people. So I've been trying to understand that, and I wondered what the group thinks about the level of support right across the board that we're getting for the reparatory justice movement.
Does someone want to answer? Councillor Lake, or Mr. Bonsu, or Mr. Peterson?
Although it was actually a comment and a question anyway.
Pardon? Do you want to aim it at someone?
Information than,
okay,
than wanting an answer. But if somebody wants to comment, that's fine.
Verena, I was just wondering whether the chief actually had much to say about the condition of the people. Did he put any contemporary perspective on the condition of such people in Trinidad?
Yes, his conversation was rooted in the conditions of the Taino people in, well, they're not, he calls them Caribs, but we know that that's not the word people are using for themselves. So he switched to First Nation peoples of Arima in Trinidad and Tobago, which is the only community, active community. And he spoke about their condition, the lack of recognition of their presence, and the fact that post-colonial, post-independence regimes also have a responsibility to address the visibility and the socioeconomic conditions of that group. We are trying to, at the center, we're trying to bring visibility to the indigenous peoples of the region. We have a special issue of social and economic studies on reparation, which should come out next month. And we do have an article from a professor who has been working with that group, Fortes. He has been Maximilian Fortes, who has a piece in that journal bringing attention to the indigenous peoples. But I think all the chiefs also mentioned the fact that the reparation movement needs to pay more attention to their condition, because they suffered the brunt of the Columbus Project.
Okay, thank you. Oh, okay. Just I think I don't know. Maybe Esther, do you have one now, or do you have them all collected, Nikki, to pose the questions? Does
Yeah,
anyone else
there
weigh in on
wasn't that many questions. There was some discussion and comments, but not
Okay.
that many questions. I think one of the ones that was posed as a question again was from Professor Vereen. Where is the plaque telling people about Colston now? In terms of when Cleo was speaking, and I believe Cleo responded to that, but perhaps you can share a more public response, Cleo.
Right. Okay. So again, the discussion in the Caribbean right now is about once these monuments and statues fall, what happens to the narrative around them for the children, for future generation. So you know, so they're fallen. Are we putting them in museum? And who is going to rewrite the narrative that will be placed alongside the monuments in the museum, various museum, so that children do get the right history. So when Cleo was speaking, I'm sorry I didn't hear the part about what happened to the plaque. So that's why I had put that in, because you said one had been done, it didn't get put up. So where is it now? And I actually have a question to see to the group. How do you feel about Professor Jeff Palmer's alternative view that statues must not be taken down, they must stay, but that we should lobby for the plaque to be redone to tell the truth? As an aside, I'm hearing that the Dundas's surviving relatives, for example, have said they'd rather have the statue down than to have a narrative that dishonors, his ancestors. I mean, dishonors, that's his word, not ours, obviously.
Okay.
Does someone want to respond to that? There is a debate, obviously, about whether or not taking down the statues isn't erasing history, and shouldn't they stay, and perhaps alternative sites or monuments be erected alongside them. That's one of the debates that's going on, certainly here in the United States, and as I understand, elsewhere also. And so I don't know if in your movement to take down the Colston statue, Councillor Lake, whether or not that conversation came up about the erasure of history, sort of what Vereen is getting at there.
Well, it's always come up, and ironically, the campaign was seeking to do quite the opposite. It was seeking to tell all the history, not just a kind of muddled lie. So yeah, the campaign has always advocated to have these things contextualized in a museum. I think it's an important point that Vereen makes about, well, okay, fine, the Colston statue lobbed into the river and then fished out. The conservation people from the museum have worked very hard to preserve the graffiti and everything else that was on it, with the view of having it on display soon. But who is going to be given agency to actually tell the stories? Are we still going to be in a position where some of us might be brought on a panel or a steering group in a tokenistic type way, but still not empowered or able to present our narrative and our story in the museum context? I still feel it will be something that is done for us, really. There is a steering group, I should say, as well, that I sit on. There's other people here who are on that steering group. So that is something that's positive, but I've seen other episodes where, you know, people like to hold on to the positions that they've got within these institutions. And maybe now there will be more space for alternatives, but, you know, that remains to be seen. The plaque itself, I'm not sure where it is. In fact, I'm, you know, inspired to find out now, Vereen, after your question, because again, that is part of the story. That will be something that could go in a museum collection to show people the steps that were taken and that failed. And even the merchant venturers themselves, whilst there was some dispute about what had actually gone on with the plaque, they actually came out on Twitter about a week or so ago, apologising for having interfered with the plaque.
I'm sorry, colleagues, I have to run, but Gabrielle from the center is still in the chat and she will relay to me anything else. But as I go, I want to say that I'm a little bit disappointed that in Jamaica itself, there is more energy around the taking down of statues. And, but there is going to be a seminar next week where we're going to talk about this at the University of the West Indies. We will send you the link for those who want to join. A big conversation has been around the medal worn by the Governor General, but which has an image of a white angel stamping on the neck of a black man that is supposed to be the devil. But of course, the devil is in the form of a black man. And how ironic. But some of us are saying that, yes, he has said he'll stop wearing it, but the larger conversation is why we need him in the first place. Why don't we, why does Jamaica, as an independent country, have to have a Governor General that represents the Queen of England? And the second conversation that's going on is that it's more than monuments, more than statues. If we're talking about iconographic decolonization, if we're talking about decolonial justice, then we have to have a bigger conversation about all the colonial relics that exist in our space, not just on the landscape, but also in the medals we award. We award a Musgrave Medal. We have in our churches plaques and tributes to enslavers like Beckford. We have communities named after Hamilton Brown, who helped to suppress the war led by Sam Sharp. So we have to have a larger conversation about the naming of roads and buildings and the curriculum and all the ideologies that defeat and they're resulting in the lack of support for the reparation movement on a larger scale. But thank you, everyone, and we will continue to speak. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for, if you'd send that link, we'll get it out. Vereen, thanks so much. Okay. All right. Are there other questions in the chat? There seem to be some comments in the chat room.
Yeah, there's one question here I'd like to read from Shadona, saying, thank you all for your interventions. Recently, I attended a webinar entitled Dominican Blackness from Slave Uprisings to Black Lives Matter with Dr. Silvio Torres Saliant, who was the keynote speaker. There he was asked his opinion about the tearing down of statutes and whether they should stay or not. His response was that they should remain, but alongside them should be statues of Black heroes. Sorry, I've lost the rest of it. Black heroes who led slave rebellions. Yeah, so she's asking what are our thoughts about this? What are our opinions that we have on this? Similar question. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Hello, yes, Kofi, please.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, what's this? Oh, anyway, yeah. First of all, I'm struck by the point about the indigenous people in Trinidad, and I want to really say something about that. But before then, this issue about statues, whether they should remain or be torn down, and the opinion of Geoff Palmer that Vereen spoke about. I think we should understand that these statues have been erected at certain vantage points where they tower and dominate over everything else. And I can't forget the point Cleo made about that is a remembrance ceremony where, you know, this statue is there in such a vantage point that you bow your head, you lift it up, and this is it staring just at you. And this is where they have been erected deliberately. I mean, if you go to Trafalgar Square, you see Nelson, you know, on that column, right? So it's not just any place that they've been put. I mean, if you go to Parliament Square, you see, you know, this criminal of a Churchill and all the other criminals, you know, surrounding, you know, him, right? You know, at Parliament Square, vantage point. A lot of the generals that have fought these wars of genocidal conquest, you know, are you know, put at very, very vantage point. So how can we be saying that we should put the sheroes and heroes of the resistance of, you know, in positions by these people? They will certainly still be dominating that unless they're going to erect something taller than Nelson's column at Trafalgar Square, or, you know, what is to Henry Dundas and on all these characters. So I think where they all belong is in the museums, right? And that is actually being generous to them, because in many, many places, you know, when they tear down these statues, they get bent, right? They went on rampage, destroying everything about arts, looting and burning and committing rape and plunder, right? So I think that is where they belong in the museums, and that is not erasing the history. If you want to study about them, you go there. But I think that the places which they have occupied, which says something about how they continue to be valued up till now, you know, other people should replace them. And for me, one of the important things that there is silence about is that these crimes against humanity that the ruling classes of Europe have committed against the majority of peoples on this planet, right? These crimes were resisted from within these societies themselves by people who knew they were crimes. These were Europeans themselves. Albert Renault has, you know, was followed by so many other people right up till today. You know, if you're talking about a place like Bristol, what about a woman like Mary Estlin, who led the resistance against the Colston and the likes and the legacy, who was one of the fiercest, you know, leaders, female leaders of abolitionism, who had to fight her way to even come to prominence. And then what about towering figures like Basil Davidson, who helped in his historical research and writings to correct the false notion that Africa had no history for anybody to be proud of. You know, he is a son of Bristol. So let us not create the impression that even amongst European peoples, there aren't better human beings, more deserving of the respect of all of us, more deserving of places of honor than these criminals that the ruling classes of Europe insist on glorifying, you know, today. So I think that there are choices that can be made. And let us insist that those who were persecuted for standing within the society against the criminality of their ruling classes, many of them who were hung, drawn, and quartered, right, for resisting this criminality at the time that it was happening. This is the time for Europeans to go into their own history and bring those people to places of honor, other than these criminals that they continue pushing on to us. And then this brings me to the issue about the indigenous peoples of Trinidad, and particularly of places like all of Abya Yala, including the Caribbean, you know, places like Aotearoa and Shinia, Australia, and so on. Now, the fact of the matter is this. These people, that one of the greatest injustices have been done to them, that their homelands have been completely taken over and converted into white supremacy states. And that is what the United States of America is, that is what Canada is, that is what Jamaica is. Jamaica is no creation of the people who occupy it today. Jamaica is a European creation, right? Just as Australia is a white supremacy racist creation. And Evo Morales, who led the Bolivian revolution and was recently toppled by white supremacy racist coup d'etat, proposed a solution that not even the Cuban Revolution could advance at the time. That is to recognize that these places must be plurinational states, where the nations that occupy these places have equal rights to these places and needs to be read. And that is the challenge in the Caribbean. So unless the indigenous people are restored to their place of eminence and give recognition to their national presence, the fact that they were minoritized by white supremacy, genocide, and ecocide, in terms of becoming a minority. When Columbus went there, they were in the majority. And it was a deliberate genocide against them that reduced them and minoritized them. And if there's going to be any justice done, it is for us also as African people, when we are in their homelands, to be part of their struggle to regain control of their homelands, to at least be given recognition if they are even a numerical minority, because they've been forced by genocide to become the numerical minority. We have to recognize the fact that they are the first peoples. And this is the challenge of Black Lives Matter, whether it recognizes that the indigenous peoples of Abya suffer, virtually the same kind of atrocities they suffer, whether they are going to create alliances that restores this land to the people to whom it belongs in the first place, and that they also face the challenge, as Brother Kojo put it very correctly, that there is an issue about their homeland. And so long as African Americans continue to be part of AFRICOM, to subject Africa to neo-colonial domination by US imperialism, there's a big question about whether it is justice they are about, or they're just trying to make use of American exceptionalism. Because this is the time for us to put the injustices against everybody together in order to build a world of global justice for all. And that is what rebellion should be about. And that is what the holistic reparatory justice should really lead us to. It is not just an Africans who need reparations, it is all of humanity that needs to repair this planet and return it to a home for all peoples.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sophie. Absolutely marvelous.
Joyce, there's a request that we also put that question.
Yeah, from Velma.
Yeah, to the other panelists as well.
Yeah, so the question is, given the royal family's historical links to the enslavement of Africans via the Royal African Company, should the Queen still remain head of the Commonwealth Caribbean?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hear you.
Under no condition, and in the direction of reparations and reparative justice, should the Queen, who with her third grandmother Elizabeth started the capturing, kidnapping and transporting of African people into enslavement under Hawkins and what's the other one? Hawkins and John Hawkins, well, the two cousins.
Drake.
And Drake, Francis Drake, then developing the Royal Adventurers. Under no condition in our right mind should African people be in an institution where the Queen and her children are still in a position where we're subjugated and they're empowered. all these colonies should be republics, and the continent of Africa should be as united as Osagifo had projected in the 50s. The World Bank, in an article that they wrote recently, they declared two things. They said that for Africa to develop and to benefit its future and its children, they have to remove the borders, and we need to be industrializing, where we're producing our own raw material, our own finished goods that we sell to everybody else. This is the findings from the World Bank. So therefore, the Queen and her children and all the others with her should never be in a position where they're holding any position of Commonwealth.
I see a hand here. I don't know what other questions you have. Is it Al Hope or Sonia White Hope? Is that a question, a raised hand?
But take off your, yeah.
Is that a raised hand from, I'm looking at a hand. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that is
Oh.
a raised hand.
Okay,
Okay.
please, would you pose your question?
Yeah, I had written in the chat. I was trying to determine or get some feedback on what is the ultimate end game of the tearing down of statues. You know, we're talking about history and the fact that these folks are sort of aggrandized in statues and what have you. But what's the real aim? At the end of the day, we want a true history. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that what we're after? If we want a true history, then that's going to require political action. We're going to have to change the policymakers. We're going to have to impact the curriculum. I mean, we get down to the real work of having a true history, because that's not only our problem, but it's their problem as well. That is the rank and file European, whether they're in America or Europe or wherever they may be, is that they've been lied to as well in terms of their own history. So we can take down the statues. I have no opposition against that, because they're the outward manifestations of racism and incorrect history. But how do we really get an inclusive history in the history books that are being taught in schools? That requires more concentrated political action in order to change policymakers, in order to make ourselves be heard that way. Even here in the US, as I look at what's happening with the Black Lives Matter and all the energy that's being generated out there, and I'm saying, well, so is any of this translating into votes? Is any of this translating into removing senators? Is any of it resulting in moving mayors in the towns in England and Liverpool or any place else? What is it going to net us? We've got all of this energy out here, but who's directing it, and where do we want it to go? Because if it's not going to the right places, then we're doing what we've always done. We're out here expressing ourselves and burning energy that we need to convert into real results at the end of the day. And I'm just trying to see who has any thoughts on where that's going. It's great to throw a statue in the river of some guy who was a slave owner, but what do you do at the end of the day to teach the history of who this guy was, how England has benefited, how the Queen has benefited, how they perpetuated it? I mean, is it really being taught? So that's my point. Where are we going? What's the end game in this whole process? And is anybody thinking about it to any great degree? And can we actually control it? Can we actually control it, or get on the people to understand it and get behind, points, various points? Community organizing is based on deliberately selected objectives and winning victories. That's how it's done. And if we're not doing that, then we're just pissing in the wind, okay? And when you piss in the wind, it's gonna blow back in your face. Simple, okay? So that that's my thought for the day. I'll take it off the air.
Thank you.
If I can come back on that, with regards to Bristol, we have got a sense of will to a certain extent, and something that has been building for the last 2 years now and is actually ready to be delivered is the One Bristol curriculum, which will go across the city and is a holistic education program. It's about not just reducing world history to the month of October, and that has been backed completely by the political administration. So that is encouraging, and that is obviously a step in the right direction. However, what might be an issue there is that much of the schools are not under the control of the council anymore. That's been reduced to just a handful. So we have the academy structure. Incidentally, the academy structure, one of the main ones in Bristol, is actually operated by the Venturers Trust, which again is connected to the merchant venturers, but they are on board with this curriculum. However, many of the private and independent fee-paying schools, that many of them are connected to this legacy, I think there needs to be more dialogue with them to ensure that this curriculum also reaches them, and yeah, push to adopt it really. What I have seen in the past few weeks since what's happened is a number of young people who would have been there at the protest, because of myself and other people who are, long-standing activists really and part of the reparations movement. We have made sure that we have engaged our young people and tried to show them different strategies. So for example, we have our full council next week. So I've encouraged young people to put in a statement and to turn up at the full council and speak about, buildings that may be taken off of the community. Give your testimony, say what it means to you, be there in the face, because one thing we failed at, and maybe I can take part of the responsibility because I am a councillor, but trying to get our community engaged in mainstream politics, even having Europe's first mayor of African heritage, has not seen any numbers come to full council. So again, I totally agree that we need, and there are people doing the work who are building long-term and having a long-term strategic action plan rather than what most of us do a lot of the time, be reactionary. So I completely hear what you're saying. And it is now, I think, with the statue toppled, there is this almost a window of an opportunity that we haven't seen for a while, but it's about how hard are people going to push and who is actually going to come together to give us that unified voice to show that we are a group of people that cannot be ignored now and that our demands must be met or else.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. My response to this would be, and this is about the long gain and the long game, and we're still highlighting that, bearing in mind that this whole institution of racism actually started right here in Britain, right here in their legal systems. We're still pushing for the all-party commission of inquiry into truth and reparatory justice. We charge ecocide and genocide because the rape and the plundering of Africa's resources and other people's resources is actually putting people's lives and their livelihood at risk. We talk about Papua New Guinea. I mean, I've watched the documentary Coconut Revolution nearly 10 years ago, and I'm surprised. Well, I'm saddened that the impact of Britain and Australia and Indonesia is still taking the lives of African people, highlighting that indeed their legal declaration stated that we have no human rights or no right to life. I say bring on the all-party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry into Truth and Reparatory Justice. When it comes on to those who are defending the excesses of the ruling elite, I find it bizarre that it's the very working class people right here in the UK which highlights the depth and the level of disinformation and misinformation that they have imposed on them that actually defends them. The creation of the United States, the creation of Australia, the massacre in Manchester, the Land Enclosure Act, all these things, when you put it together, highlights that it's strange that they're defending the very people who doesn't have their interest at heart any at all.
Okay. There's some questions that have been raised that I should probably read out as well. Nikki, do you have, maybe you can get to it quicker than me. Okay. So Judy's saying we have university research into who were reimbursed for releasing enslaved people, but is there research on the buildings, roads, industries, etc. they built? I live in Brighton on South Coast, UK, which became rich from enslavers coming from the sea air. We have streets they built and plaques to them, but not statutes that we know of in Sussex. Okay, and a point made by Glenroy, why do people talk about history as if it's only something that happened a long time ago? It is now, it is happening now. We are making history. Let us ensure the correct history is now written. And Jendai, what is the panel's view on the gestures made by Green King and Lloyds of London, where they have been seen fit to donate to so-called BAME communities after the murder of George Floyd and the aftermath of that televised execution?
We should perhaps add Velma's comment as well, because which says, I'm concerned about the acronym BAME because we are talking about the transatlantic trade, in inverted commas. Any compensation should be aimed at the descendants of Britain's plantation children, not other minority groups, just to add to the question posed by Jendai.
My comment on this is that the 1661 enactment and legislation didn't say Chinese. It didn't say Asians. It says Africa, as a matter, it says African people are not humans, but chattel real estate and property. And therefore, in order to restore our position of humanity, we've got to get rid of this black. Black only came into being because of the ideology of the superior, inferior, and this notion of races. Let us return to the reference that gives us inspiration and aspiration, vision and strength to do that which is necessary to restore our place in humanity. BME, I challenge this. When these so-called white people come and tell me they're white, I ask them to explain it because they don't look like the sheet of paper that I work with. So in the context of that, I'll ask, is it color, concept, or conduct? The honest ones will say, well, actually, we're pink. And I'm saying, why are you telling me then that I should define you as being white? But of course, the perception and the language of whiteness is to be human. Anything outside of that is the object and the other. And as we speak, let's give back edification and veneration to our ancestors. They were never slaves. They were scientists and biologists. I've been to Kemet, and I mean, I'm still blown by what I've seen and how much energy that has given me in terms of my sense of value and worth. So I don't know how we're gonna do it, or this has to be part of the truth and reparatory justice, where those who don't even know who they are is in a position to define us.
Okay.
May I make a comment quickly?
Yeah.
On this, I think that as long as we have the expectation that Europeans are going to deal properly and fairly with us we are going to direct our energy in the wrong direction. We are going to have to, as a people, decide what sacrifices we are going to make in order to move our own agenda despite whatever anybody else might do. If they do it, it's fine. But my history tells me, and their history tells me, that they have never done it before. So why should now I assume that the sun's not going to come up tomorrow when it's been coming up every damn day of my life? Okay, that's the point. So what are we going to do? In other words, what you going to do? What's our plan? What's our economic plan? What's our plan for unifying the continent of Africa? What's our plan for overcoming the crisis of leadership that we have on the continent that allows the continent to be where it is right now and other people to come in and exploit it? Okay, if we're looking at the continent of Africa as being the central focal point for our strength and that things which protects us wherever we may be on the planet, the African Union can't even move its troops from point A to point B when there's a crisis without calling on Europe. So, I mean, so what are we talking about? What are we really talking about? Okay, so we've got to get down to where we pool our money, we pool our resources, we make demands on the leaders of Africa to lead and not to exploit and allow other people to exploit the resources that should be used for the people. You know, once that gets together, then we could, you know, I think we can branch out from there and go some places. But, you know, these people may or may not pay reparations. You know, I mean, power concedes nothing without a demand. We're making some demands right now, and they're going to give as little as they possibly can in this moment. Okay, and if we sit here and put all of our focus over there on pressing them to give us what's our due without developing something over here on our own that gets it for us, okay, then if I'm around in the next 20 years or 30 years, we'll be having the same conversation. And I'm not a pessimistic person. I'm just a realist, you know? It's like, I think it was Mark Twain said that, you know, a pessimist or optimist or pessimist is an optimist with experience. So, you know, I'm totally optimistic, but let's look at what's happened. That's the bottom line. That's my comment on that.
Okay. We don't want to miss any questions. I have the feeling that there's some comments or questions that are still out there. I know there were a number put together. You sort of joined them all together in a compilation of one question. Yeah. I wonder if you'd like to probe into that, Councillor Lake or Mr. Bonsu, one of you, or Kevin, Mr. Peterson, anybody wants to jump in on that, the other pieces of that long question.
And when they finish, there's a couple more.
Sorry, okay. Was it a response to what was just said?
Well,
the questions that were asked earlier, there was 3 separate questions that I read out. Yeah.
There were some responses. I wonder if there's any more that anyone wants to say.
If not, I wanted to say that I totally agree that we can't continue to put everything into the system that's never served us. And I want to feel encouraged by, you know, formation of things like the Global Afrikan Peoples Parliament, or trying to do that on a very local scale. So just within our city, trying to build our own institution. Somebody has mentioned about, you know, decolonizing the curriculum. Yeah, that's important, but it's also important that we have our own schools, our own university. I was encouraged to visit Washington, DC, and visit Howard University and see what is possible. You know, we don't have that in the UK. And I think an example is a young man who has now got a place at one of Bristol's top independent fee-paying schools. He's passed the test, he can go, but the fees are 30 grand a year. and there's a petition and a panic on to support our young man to get there. And of course I would love to support him, but at the same time, I've now got a problem with the idea of using our money to put our young man through a school that's likely to do more harm psychologically than good. Why can't we use our money to build our own establishment? So I think many of us are on the page and are willing to do what it takes. And I'm, again, energized by young people who get it now. And they're willing to take up the baton and do what they can, obviously with some guidance. But there are many people who aren't on that page. It's still about trying to fix a terribly broken system that, and I agree with you, it may never be fixed for us.
I just wanted to add something now that you brought that comment up about Howard. And you know, no doubt everyone here in this meeting probably knows that there are 106 what we call historically Black colleges and universities in the United States, or there were, that these universities, these institutions were created from the end of the 19th and early 20th century through the mid 20th century by people, by African descended people themselves. You know, with some exceptions, there were some monies that were given by white philanthropists and so on. But these people, Black churches and fraternities and sororities put their money together to create these institutions under Jim Crow segregation, lynching, and other kinds of state-sanctioned racial violence. Okay, in a structure not too unlike what you have in the United Kingdom. Okay, what's worse is that we have a whole continent of 55 countries with universities that are still, where curricula is still determined by the former European colonial masters. That's what's worse. So it's as though that experience of what people can do for themselves in a time of very great crisis, 106 examples of that mean nothing, matter nothing to people elsewhere that are trying to figure out how to move ahead. You know, rarely do people from the African continent, leaders, not always, but they do sometimes, but rarely, more rarely than it should be, come to these universities to say, help us with our agricultural reform. Tuskegee is not the place they're going to for that, you know, a Black founded university, or Howard for our medical system. They're not going to Howard, they're not going to Meharry. Why is that? Well, this is what we're talking about in terms of unification and and moving forward with the legacy that we've created ourselves in our different places, of the University of the West Indies and all of the other examples in the West Indies. I mean, we've got a legacy here that we should draw on and realize that we may not have to recreate the wheel every time we get ready to do something. That's just a caveat, but please let's move forward with the other questions that we have.
Okay.
Perhaps linked to that is Judy's question that asks about how can we ensure reparations organisations are resourced to work together to ensure African people can take the lead with this raised awareness of the need to repair the damage.
Okay, my comment on this is that as African people, we've got to be now at the place where we've got to see the worth of valuing and funding our own activities for liberation. As Brother Sanja rightly say, that we'll be sitting around and waiting for others to do for us what really we should be doing for ourselves.
Sure.
Can I just make a quick comment, sort of following up on that, and also on what the brother just said?
Oh,
you've muted.
Your sound went out.
We can't hear you. You're muted.
I know.
Yeah.
Because I'm at an intersection in a condo and I have more damn traffic on the street from
okay.
and noise than you could well imagine. getting back to, here's an example. This is what I mean about concrete action, about using our imagination and the resources that we have available to us to do for ourselves. 106 historically Black colleges and universities in the United States. And as Dr. Joyce Hope Scott said, African countries are going to other places to get other expertise to have their problem solved, whether it's agriculture or medicine or law or whatever else. So where's the African Union? Why, Black colleges, historically Black colleges and universities in the United States have struggled in recent years to survive. They played a crucial role in educating African descendant people here in the United States. They could play a crucial role in educating African people in the Caribbean or on the African continent. But what African government or what has the African Union said about, hey, we got 106 universities here in the United States that could be a game changer for our education systems. Why don't we pool our money together and support these colleges and universities so that they can support us? Haven't ever heard anything like that emerge from anybody's mind. See, that's what I mean when I say we're not thinking about our own assets and what we have available to us to fix our own problems. Okay, that's what I mean. I mean, we're looking everywhere else except in our house. Well, let me see what I can go out and ask somebody for rather than looking in our own house and see what we already have that can solve the problem for ourselves. Okay, so once again, I certainly, demand reparations. Okay, we should have it because that would change the wealth gap situation that we have everywhere we exist on the planet. Okay, but we don't have it. But we do have thousands of athletes that makes hundreds of millions and billions of dollars every year. And what are they doing with it? Okay, so I'll leave it at that.
How you doing? He took me to the shop and he wants me to. Oh, okay.
Right. Okay. Is there
Maybe
any questions? Panina has one. Talking about reparations, where do we place Arab countries where Africans who seek work on those countries are dehumanized every day? Shehu Sani has written Home Truths from a Global Perspective on the continued hatred for Black people across various continents and how it has manifested, articulating quite well how the 5 continents continue to exploit from various argue points like genetics, etc., bodies like the World Bank and the IMF. And another question from Judy, how do we self-fund in light of the net worth figures for Boston? Isn't reparations also about redistributing the wealth that we've created that sits in other people's pockets?
Okay, I find that last one very interesting. And from where I'm sitting and looking, we have to be functioning from a point of power and a power base. And what helps me with this thought is that Malcolm X, and Sister Esther, you presented that as part of one of your dialogues with Got Kush TV, that he has highlighted, which is a fact, that unless we're functioning from a power base, that anything that we will be expecting and demanding will be seen as a laugh. And this is why, again, we are reinforcing that part of the whole truth and reparatory justice is the whole dynamics of restitution, where we need to take back from the Arabs and the Europeans and our sellout leaders access to our land, to which comes wealth and power. So it would then extend itself globally to where we are, just as how it works with everybody else, that once we have access to our land and the wealth, we're able to cater to all the issues that requires our human activity.
Okay, there's another question here. When we establish African schools, from Judy, that is, when we establish African schools and universities, how do we ensure that those who can't attend aren't subject to greater abuse because they are in an even smaller mainstream school population? So lots of comments happening in the chat. Does anyone else want to respond to anything?
We had a conversation around this recently, Sister Esther, and we've highlighted that there is value in local African heritage communities actually coming together under the dynamics of our complementary school and support this learning and the passing of this information. I've seen where it works because I'm one of those who benefited from it, so I know it works. It's just for us to have the commitment to follow through with it. Some of us, we don't want to be pioneers. We just want to see things working instead of actually going in and sometimes making sacrifice to get the results that we're looking for. Oh, and just to highlight too, that we really need to get on top of this, that reparation is not about money. Reparation is basically about repairing the harm and the damage, and a whole lot of damage has been done to us socially, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, that we need to fix before we go and even touch the money, or else it ain't gonna be of any value to us anyway.
Thank you for bringing that up. I just want to just quickly, and I'll let you in. We are. I was going to say this at the end, but I'll say it now because it's timely. You brought it up. Talking about the psychological, spiritual, and other sorts of cultural harm done by slavery. It is a topic that we very rarely touch or not touch enough. But there is some research going on now that you probably all heard about a post-traumatic slave syndrome. It's called, which is a name for all of the that lumps all of these harms, unattended harms together, or unacknowledged, let me say. So we are going to have some more sessions like this, and one of them will concern what we call rematriation, what's being called rematriation. And that is different from repatriation because it gets at just the issue that you raised about the psychological, spiritual, cultural, and social harms of slavery. So you'll be getting a note about that, so stay tuned for that, and hopefully you'll be around to weigh in on that conversation when we have it.
I think that the spiritual, the psychological, the social damage done is a crucial aspect of reparations. But I by no means believe or will accept that the economic aspect of how we suffer must be somehow overlooked, because right now, if you look at the African continent, just as a generator of the world's wealth and what has been taken from it, whether or not you count the human resources taken out during the transatlantic slave trade, whether you count the other kinds of resources that have been taken out under colonialism, and the resources currently being taken out under neocolonialism, we are at a loss economically, and that disparity keeps us from having an African Union that can field a combined military force and have our own planes and our own ships to take our soldiers where we need to go kick ass, basically. Okay, so I mean, we cannot dismiss the economic aspect of reparations, and I think that it has to be there, whether it's front and center or whether it's bringing up the rear. It has to be a crucial part of this entire package.
Absolutely. And okay, so we've got 7 minutes. I don't know if anyone, if there is a word, maybe 2 or 3 words that our panelists would like to say in closing. Very brief. We want to just to leave us with something to think about or to comment further on something that's been raised? Any one of the panelists?
Okay. My thinking is that one of the fundamental aspect of our repairing and healing is our international legal personality. And having gone into the research of the 1661 Declaration by Britain, everything that is in dearth in relation to our lives is hinged on that. And this is why it is important for me and for us that we push again towards the all-party parliamentary parliamentary reparative for truth and reparative justice. That is essential. So when that is in place, we will then have the conversation in the open as to who benefited, why benefited, how, and everybody will now know. And in that context, we'll have the opportunity to understand why we're seeing the issues on the continent of Africa as it is now. The governments in Africa, unless it was Osagyefo or Patrice Lumumba, these are extension of European policies and programs. So the push really is that we should be pushing for the restitution of our land, because everything is in the land. Everything that we're talking about is in the land. The ability to support economically, politically, socially our people, both on the continent and anywhere we find ourselves.
Okay. Anyone else from the panel?
I'll just add that you know, as we continue to discuss, debate, and dialogue around reparations, that that we do not lose the element of reconciliation, which is which I believe is embedded in the theme of reparations and repair. So even in Boston, as we're talking about renaming this building as a form of repair, we also hold in context the whole idea of reconciliation, addressing the racism that has divided us in this city. So as we continue to, this very important work of repair, we need to be equally also mindful of reconciling.
Thank you very much. Again, thank all of you for your incredibly poignant comments. Thank all of you for your questions and your comments for the discussion that followed the wonderful interventions by our panelists. I'm very thankful. I want to say on behalf of the Inosaar again, how much we appreciate all of you taking the time out today. And it's a very nice day in Boston for those of us here and other places where you are located. So it's we don't take it lightly that you decided to join us, and we hope that you will continue to do so. As I said earlier, we have another panel. One of our next panels that's coming up at the end of next month is going to be on planet repairs, environmental racism, and reparative justice. So we hope that we will be sending you notices about that, and hope you'll be around to talk about that very, very, very important aspect of reparations, reparatory justice. In the meantime, we thank the panelists very, very much for their remarks. We've wanted to look at, and we did look at, this idea of the contested memories that are created around the statues and other kinds of monuments and historical sites that plague our landscape, that are denigrating, that in fact are affronts to those of us who are descendants of the ancestors who captured and trafficked and put into chattel slavery and genocide under slavery and colonialism. It's allowed us to explore issues around, the process of reviewing and rewriting historical narratives, which many of you talked about in the visual and iconographic and educational curriculum. There's been a lot of talk about the educational curriculum. that it represents us, that all of us and our children now and perhaps in the future will be needing to look at. What about the risks of erasure, forgetting the historical texts that accompany these public sites going forward? We've raised that issue, how to link all of this to broader questions concerning educational repairs, educational reform, cognitive justice, the cognitive justice content, all of these of a decolonized, we talked about a decolonized curriculum, how these might be linked to forms of reparation and transitional justice for African descended people around the globe, and for all people. Essentially, Europeans need to know the truth of their own created history, as well as the rest of us do. So we invite your ideas. We've talked about we have a few ideas of our own, but we invite yours. Because of the nature of the Inosaar, we are reaching out broadly for people from academe, from the grassroots, from activists, organizations and communities, students, young people, issues that we need to address according to you. Please contact us with them. Think about joining the Inosaar, and make a plug for that. We're online. And again, on behalf of Inosaar, thank you. Thanks to our panelists. Thank all of you for attending. And as my young people always say, peace out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you, everybody. There's more been coming in the chat, so maybe people can look at the chat if they want to before we go. We've had some more comments reminding us about the reparations rebellion groundings happening on the 1st of Mosiah, which is the 1st of August. Cleo making the point about Haiti and recognition of Haiti in terms of the symbology of history and so forth. More comments, but we'll try and make a note of those going forward.
We are going to compile these issues, the questions, the comments, as well as the wonderful remarks that have been made here. It's a part of what we do in Inosaar to provide an archival, a record for the future, and not fall into the trap of movements in the past where these kinds of agenda have just gone to the side because no one has bothered to capture them in writing or in visual format. So we appreciate all of these comments, appreciate anything you have to add at the end even, and please be in touch with us. We want to make all of this a part of our records, and that we will continue to push this. This movement requires all of us from all of the angles and efforts and positions that we can see that are necessary here. No perspective is unimportant, and we're holding out the opportunity and embracing any ideas and suggestions that you have that will be helpful. Again, thank you so much, and we will be in touch. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks,
absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joyce. Well done.
This is
very well done. Fantastic.
This is part of the reconciliation process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you all again. You can see we have all of the chat information over here on the side. We will be keeping this and in some kind of report, and you can have access to it. Just be in touch with us online. We're on Twitter. We have our website, and you have our emails individually. So we're looking forward to hearing more from you. And thank you again for sharing your afternoon with us.